Good morning, everyone. I would ask you, our guests, to please take their seats. Senator Capito and I are happy to welcome you all. We've been on recess for a while. It took me a while to find this room, but I finally wandered into the right hearing room. So, it's good to be back. Today's hearing is our committee's first hearing since the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, the most significant investment to combat climate change in our nation's history. And I'd like to take a moment to discuss the significance of this law before we turn to the hearing itself. This historic law is going to deliver nearly $370 billion in climate and clean energy funding that will put our nation on track to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. This is a critical down payment on reaching the President's goals on cutting emissions in half by the end of this decade and achieving net zero emissions by 2050. These investments will also significantly reduce emissions that impact our nation's air quality, helping all Americans breathe a little easier. Passing this law could not have come at a more critical time. As many of you know, this week, heavy rainfall flooded areas, streets, and highways surrounding Providence, Rhode Island. Temperatures in Sacramento, California broke all-time records amid a historic heat wave in that state. It's quite clear that climate crisis is here, and this extreme weather is impacting the air that we breathe. Currently, there are nearly 70 wildfires burning across this country. Along with the destruction that wildfires bring, the smoke they release contains particulate matter and other air pollutants that pose a threat to human health. Smoke doesn't just threaten nearby communities, but also downwind communities as well. We know that smoke from wildfires in the West has reached as far as our states here on the East Coast. Some people say that we're at the end of America's tailpipe, and some days I fully agree with that. As these wildfires become more frequent and severe, so do the emissions that they create. The health risks from exposures to this pollution are even greater for disadvantaged communities, including rural communities, which are often more vulnerable to wildfires and the resulting air pollution. That's why we've made mitigating the climate and health risks from wildfires eligible for funding under our Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grants Program in the Inflation Reduction Act. This new program provides $3 billion in grants and technical assistance for mitigating environmental issues in disadvantaged communities. And that brings me to Senator Merkley's two pieces of legislation that we're considering today, along with several others. The Smoke Ready Communities Act would create a grant program to support communities in preparing for and responding to the potential health risks from harmful air emissions that emanate from wildfires. The Smoke Planning and Research Act would support community planning and research activities on the effects of smoke emissions from wildfires on human health. I look forward to hearing more about these bills shortly from Senator Merkley and our witnesses. Before we do, however, let me turn to another piece of legislation that we're going to examine today, and that is the Recognizing the Protection of Motorsports Act, also known as RPM Act. And this legislation seeks to clarify that race cars do not need to meet Clean Air Act emission requirements. I commend Senator Kelly for his leadership on this legislation, as well as our good friend Senator Burr, the original sponsor of the bill. We can all agree that race car drivers shouldn't face liability for the emissions of their cars that are used solely for organized competition. Fortunately, as EPA has informed us, the agency has never sought to assert that individual drivers are liable under the Clean Air Act. But as a $10 million civil penalty announced last week makes clear, bad actors are attempting to exploit the racing community to sell devices that tamper with pollution control for on-road use. And while I do have concerns that this legislation is a solution without a problem, I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses today and seeing if we can reach an agreement on language to clarify this point without inadvertently creating new uncertainties or opportunities for litigation in the law. And finally, the fourth bill we're considering today is Senator Thune's legislation, the Livestock Regulatory Protection Act. This legislation would restrict EPA's ability to ensure permits under the Clean Air Act for emissions from certain agricultural activities, especially those relating to biological processes for livestock farming. As we discuss this legislation today, it's worth noting that EPA already refrains from issuing such permits. And why is that? One reason is the inclusion of language similar to Senator Thune's bill in annual appropriations legislation for several years now. That means the decision on whether this restriction is necessary is up to Congress each year, not the EPA. So doing so provides Congress with important flexibility. And with that, again, we want to thank our panel of witnesses for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from each of you as part of our discussion.